Good evening and welcome to Straight Talk with Mildred Crump. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to watch my show. You know that I believe that knowledge is power. And tonight we are going to be exposed to a subject that for too long has been hidden. We're bringing it to light. We want the parents and the grandparents and the family members of children who are affected with this particular condition. The condition is called autism. Hopefully, by the end of the show, you will have information that will help you in helping someone else deal with this issue. We have three very special people with us tonight. The first is Portia Lowry, and I know her from another life, so I'm going to read part of her bio that she has shared with us. She is a board member for Nason's Place. She's a former educator within the Newark public school system, and she taught both general education and special needs for 20 years. She is currently employed with the Children's Literacy Initiative. She is the parent of 3 children, 2 of whom are diagnosed with autism. Thank you for coming, Portia,
Thank you
and being with us tonight.
You're welcome.
Our next guest in the center is Officer. May I call you Officer? Because that's what you are.
By all means.
Officer Damon Farms. He is married for 19 years to Donna Farms with 3 boys, Damon Jr., David, and Dominic. He served for 22 years in the United States Air Force. He retired in 2014. He served in law enforcement for 20 years, and currently he is with the Parsippany Police Department. He is a member of the Masonic Lodge Tyree 29, Prince Hall affiliated in Newark. And also he is the director of the Autism Awareness Initiative for the most worshipful Prince Hall, I'll get it out, state for the state of New Jersey. Let me say that again. He is the director of the Awareness Initiative for Autism for the most worshipful Prince Hall
Grand Lodge.
Grand Lodge.
State of New Jersey.
What's important is not my introduction, it's what he has to say. Welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you
much.
for coming. Last but certainly not least, the lady who helped me understand how to manage something that you never anticipated. Nadine Wright Abakur is founder and CEO of Nason's Place. Many of you have probably heard of her. Today we're going to hear not just of her, but about her and about what she's doing. She is a native of Newark, New Jersey, and currently resides in the city of East Orange. She received her early education in the Newark and East Orange school system and went on to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree in Business Management and Marketing from Felician College. In 2006, Nadine's life was changed forever with the diagnosis of autism for her then 20-month-old son, Nason. Once Nason was diagnosed with autism, Nadine changed her career path and started a nonprofit called Nason's Place. I'm going to ask that you bear with me. This is a very emotional subject, and you will find out why later in this program. She started Nason's Place in 2012 due to the lack of accessible and affordable programs for children affected by autism in and around particularly urban inner cities in Essex County. She is not only the founder of Nason's Place, but she advocates for children and families affected by autism. Since starting Nason's Place, Nadine has hosted a series of programs and workshops toward this effort of helping and supporting families. When she is not advocating, which I don't know when it is, for her own son and families affected by autism, she enjoys spending time with her family and friends as much as possible. I said at the beginning of the show there was something that we had in common. My grandson has been diagnosed with autism. And I am so proud of my son and my daughter-in-law because they realized that having autism doesn't mean you don't have a life. So I want to thank you to both of you. And I want to thank you for something else. They're not embarrassed. And this is something that we need to talk about. So Nadine, why don't you just start, since you're really the foundation of so much of what we're going to talk about today.
Well, first I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here and share information about my own personal journey, but about the journey also of helping children and families affected by autism and around these underserved inner city communities. As you said in the bio, but first I want to thank these two people here with me today who are also both parents of children with autism for sharing this opportunity to share our journeys. And each one of our journeys are different because each child with autism is different. But 20 months, when my son Nason was about 20 months old, I noticed something wasn't quite right with him. I noticed he wasn't doing the things he used to do. And I'm wondering why, and it struck me as odd when I called his name, he wouldn't respond. So fast forward, we realized that there was something wrong with what was happening in his development. So we eventually had him diagnosed, and we did get the diagnosis of not autism at that time. It was called persuasive developmental delay, not otherwise specified. And now you're going back over 11 years ago. So fast forward to 2017-18 is now, children are now being more diagnosed earlier with autism because unfortunately a lot of people weren't educated on what it was, and even the physicians weren't sure as to what was happening. I will tell you that New Jersey currently has the highest rate of autism in the country, the highest.
Did you repeat that again?
New Jersey currently has the highest rate of autism in the country, 1 in 41. The national rate is 1 in 45. Those numbers are staggering because if you go back a decade ago, the numbers were 1 in every 10,000. 1 in every 10,000. So it is a growing, and to me, a health crisis. And people need to get more involved, and it deserves the public and the private sector.
So actually, what the end goal is to find out why this huge increase in the number of children who are diagnosed with autism. We have with us a police officer who is employed by the Parsippany Police Department.
Yes.
And I had the opportunity to hear him at a forum that was held in the East Ward on Monday. Was it Monday?
Yes, it was Monday.
And I was so impressed. I knew I had to have him back because he brings to this discussion something that he deals with every day as a law enforcer that may develop into a crisis. I'm not going to try and tell his story, but I do want him to emphasize on what he sees as a possible problem as our children get older. Officer Damon Farms.
All right, well, first of all, let me say thank you for the invitation. Thank you for allowing me to speak to your forum. Thank you to the ladies for accompanying, for sharing the stage with me. Nadine has been in the trenches a lot longer than I have, and I have gleaned so much from her and so much from her colleagues. So for that, I say thank you. My wife was pretty much the the champion for David. We kind of split our 3 kids. I took care of the older one. She was the champion for David, who's I call him Super Dave. That's my special guy. And then our little guy is Dominic. So now as we're getting older, it seems like the roles have kind of switched a little bit. But, you know, she was the one that was going back and forth to the doctor's offices and dealing with the teachers and all of his care. She has a binder that thick of all of his care needs and things like that. So I definitely have to salute her because, you know, I'm new to the battle. She's been in the battle since calling me up when he was about 2 years old in Iraq and saying, I think there's something going on with David. You know, how my story started was I was deployed in Iraq in 2004 into 2005. Somewhere that January, he turned 2 and he got his normal 24-month checkup, which included the MMR shot. And I remember prior to deploying him walking down the stairs and them saying daddy and mommy and normal stuff that a 20-month-old would do. And by the time I got back, he completely regressed. So I didn't hear his voice again until somewhere around 5. But by then, so much other stuff was going on, and him not knowing what's going on in his own body and dealing with the frustrations of that, and then us trying to figure out as his parents what's going on with him and dealing with our own internal struggle of watching our child go through these challenges and being very limited as to what we can do with it. So I come not only as a police officer, but more so as the parent of an autistic child, because, you know, my son is 15, he's 6'2", 200 pounds, you know, so if he is walking down the street and if he encounters someone, he may find himself in a situation that he's not prepared for just strictly because of his size. But because of his cognitive difficulties, he may not understand the danger that he's currently finds himself in. You know, so you know, he's a gentle giant. He jumps on my back and wants to get a piggyback ride, and I'm like, hey Dave, you got to warn me first. You're not 5 anymore. You're over 200 pounds, and actually he's 6'3" and I'm over 200 pounds. But he jumps on me like he's still 7. Wants a piggyback ride.
Oh yes, Portia.
Hello.
First of all, your exposure to children is through your career as a teacher of special needs children.
No, we're going to go back.
Okay.
Yes. So I have 3 children.
Yes.
My younger 2, Tyler and Isaiah, are currently diagnosed with autism. So actually, through my children, I was forced into special ed. I wanted to learn more and wanted to, you know, help my own children. So I decided to get a certain special education. And through my children, I was able to teach autism, behavior disabled, as well as in emotional disabled classrooms.
So what was your reaction?
To be honest, both of my children were diagnosed pretty early. One was diagnosed prior to age 3, and the other was diagnosed prior to age 2. With Tyler, I took him to a regular doctor's appointment because he was growing so big. And the doctor asked me if he had autism. And I was an educator, teaching general education at the time. I had no knowledge of autism, nothing. I just said, no, he's just a smart boy. He was in his crib saying his ABCs and spelling education at 2. I just took it that he was smart like my oldest son, Terrion. So we had a lot of testing done, and Tyler was diagnosed with Asperger's, receptive and expressive language disorder, feeding and swallowing issues. And with Isaiah, I would bang pots and things behind his head and call his name, and he wouldn't respond. So I had several hearing tests done, ABRs done, back and forth with the hearing specialist, and he could hear. He was then diagnosed with autism, severe autism, receptive and expressive language disorder. Did I say audio processing? Audio processing, a lot of things. So with those 2 diagnoses, and both of them being at different ends of the spectrum, one which is nonverbal, and one that can actually speak. So again, I just was a mom trying to figure out how best I can teach my children and to work with them. And I just went from there and said, okay, I'm going to switch from general ed to special ed. I'm going to go back to school and receive my master's in curriculum and instruction and a minor in inclusive classroom so that I can better service my children.
Thank you so much. I want to talk about inclusive education, so we'll come back to that because that's a very important part of managing the life of someone who is diagnosed. My story is a little different. For 43 years of my life, and many of you who are watching this show may not know this, but for 43 years of my life, I was a teacher of children with special needs, with a concentration of teaching Braille to children who were blind. But I had the foresight to pay attention to other characteristics of many of the children, especially after my own children started going to school and I would substitute in a special needs class, to the characteristics. And so my grandson, and Nadine and I have discussed this, was not born with autism. At about the age of 2, he had language, he had speech, cognitive understanding, just a regular little kid, busy. At about 2 years old, I think he was at my house and I was babysitting. And all of a sudden he started doing this. And red flag went up. So I did not say anything to my children. I thought maybe I was imagining, but I had 43 years of experience in my life. In fact, at the time that I was still teaching, they didn't even have a name for autism. What was that name you gave it?
Persuasive development.
Persuasive
PDD,
development,
yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
PDD.
And there were no, a very little in terms of a curriculum, because I'm talking, 40 years ago. So those of us who were in the field, we would often gather and exchange ideas about how to handle our children. I am fortunate that my grandson is a very high-functioning autistic child. And the reason, Nadine told me actually, the reason why is early intervention. It's the real key. And we're going to get to that subject in depth. But I want to put a pin in this for anyone who is watching and has a child whose behavior is not similar to that of your other children, and they start to do things at about the age of 2, a red flag should go up. And you should reach out to your pediatrician, alert your child study team. I'm a great believer in the IEP. I've written many an IEP in my lifetime. So there's something else I do, and I'm not ashamed to say it. His picture is on my refrigerator, and every morning that I get up, I put my hand on his face, and I ask God to handle this. And he's funny. He loves his Grammy. So I'm a believer that what we can do in the natural and combined with the spiritual, we're going to at least solve it for some people who are getting exposure to it through this show. So, anybody want to hop in and say something? And if I start to cry, you all please forgive me.
I want to say, for me personally, my journey with Nason, was when I took him to my pediatrician at that time, he chalked it up. For me, I had 3 girls previously. So he said girls develop differently than boys. So sometimes, you know, a regular pediatrician back then didn't see all of the signs. It is very important that you look to get a developmental pediatrician as well to look and examine your child, because they're more trained to know certain signs that could be occurring with your child that could be leading to an autism diagnosis. The one thing that I was told when Nason was diagnosed was, you know, children develop between that age of newborn till 5 years old. So when he was diagnosed around that 20 some odd months, they were saying that he still has time to develop, but early intervention was still key. You know, unfortunately, Nason was on the lower end of the spectrum. He is nonverbal. My son today is 6'1", 240 pounds, and he's only 13 years old. So, you know, the reality of it is he's going to grow even bigger. But I'm here to say today that I am truly grateful, because where he was 10 years ago to where he is now is amazing. And I was told things that he would not be able to do by some of the doctors that he's doing. You know, we used to throw a ball at Nason and he just let it drop to the floor. Now he's actually throwing a ball in a hoop. You know, he's actually now going to the bathroom. A lot of people don't even understand the magnitude of what it's like to have a 9-year-old child that you're still changing the diaper on. That looks like your atypical child. But I'm very pleased to say today that he is. I mean, he goes to an awesome and amazing school right here in the city of Newark, and I'm pleased to say New Jersey Regional Day School in the city of Newark is one of the best schools for me, for my son, because he has reached so many milestones.
So when Nason goes outside to play, and there may be someone who is not aware of what's going on with your son. You told us the other day about something that you put in your front yard, particularly for the police department. Do you want to talk about that as a strategy?
Definitely. The one thing I can tell you is, just like most atypical autism children, they get out of the house. Unbeknown to their caregivers or parents, they're very smart. So Nason has gotten out of the house, unfortunately, a few times. Thank God he didn't wander off far and he didn't run into the street, because he has no sense of danger. But the one thing that was important for me is to let my neighbors know in my community. It's very important that people who, you know, I was born and raised in the city of Newark in the late 60s, early 70s. Everybody watched out for everybody's children. Right. You know, everyone knew who's who and what. You know, fast forward now, you know, you don't have a lot of that. For me, as a mother with a child with special needs who was also very nonverbal, I had to make sure that my neighbors understood that this child has some special needs. He's not cognate of what's happening around him. So if he does somehow manage to get out of the house, you know, here's my phone number. We live here, you know. But the one big thing that was important, because I think a shooting happened and a child didn't comply, or something happened with the police, and it scared me, because what happens if a police officer comes down my block, my son goes into a store and takes some candy? They're not going to understand that he didn't understand it. They're just going to think maybe he's shoplifting or he's not complying. And immediately I said, what can I do? And I think I saw a sign somewhere, it may have been Portia and I talking about it, but I saw someone had a sign in front of their home or on their block that says autistic child in the neighborhood or autistic child. So I found out through my city, East Orange, that I could get a sign in front of my house that says autistic child. So if a police officer or someone came into the neighborhood, they would be able to know that there's a child in this neighborhood who potentially will not be compliant. But once I found out that I could get this sign in my community, I called all of the families that I could think about and told them, contact the East. But actually, I told them, give me your names. The East Orange department actually worked with us, and I sent them about 20 names of families from the city of East Orange. And then I got into some of our families in Newark. I think I reached out to Portia. Portia was like, Nadine, I got a sign. I said, well, Portia, how come you never said anything? So I told the families in the various cities, because Nason's place which is our nonprofit organization for children with autism, we just don't service one particular demographic.
Right.
We service children and families with autism, period. I don't care if you're from Tubuctzu. If you have a child with autism, we're going to service you and we're going to work with you. And I told them, reach out to your public works department and get those signs, because it's important that the community gets educated, because God forbid that child runs out in the street or something and the neighbor's just thinking this is just a defiant kid, you know, and it has happened. So it's very important to educate your neighbors and get them involved.
So, Officer Farms, if you can go a little bit more in depth of what kind of training should be taking place in the various cities and communities as officers.
Well, as of right now, as of 2017, the Attorney General's Office of the State of New Jersey has recognized that, you know, the autism epidemic within the state. So, and because of some of the occurrences that have hit the news, unfortunately, between police contact and members of the special needs community, they have put out some AG guideline mandated training for us. One of them is called the de-escalation techniques for persons with autism. That's one of the classes that, you know, the Attorney General's office is pretty much, they govern what police officers do for a particular state. So we march to their drum. So they pretty much said that this training is mandatory. Every officer within the state will take this. Now, there are some courses that are above and beyond that are a week-long course that you can take in substitute of that class. But a bare minimum, that was a class that was given to just give an introduction to what autism is. Because unless you are personally touched by someone with autism, you may not necessarily know what autism is when it's presented to you. As you mentioned, when I spoke on Monday, I gave some of the characteristics, and I spoke with members of the Morris County Prosecutor's Office who were our instructors for that particular class. And I got some of their notes, and that's what I used as part of my presentation. And it's pretty much highlighting some characteristics that when you look at normal law enforcement contact, you look at it in one context, but you have to look at it you have to train yourself to look at it from a different context as well. The same way how when you have DWI enforcement, when you're out there, you're looking for people who are driving while intoxicated. If you have contact with somebody like that, who is swerving all over the road, they failure to maintain lane, they're doing all of the classic stuff that you would see for somebody who appears to be an impaired driver. They're slurring their speech. You might be speaking to them. They may have a fruity smell on their breath. They might have a weird smell on their breath. Those are things that we classify as indicators that this person might be driving under the influence of alcohol. For years, you would have somebody presenting those type of characteristics, and you may put them in the holding cell. And the drunk tank, as everyone calls it, as everyone used to call it, put them in the drunk tank, let them sleep it off. The problem is, 9 times out of 10, it was probably somebody that actually was intoxicated. But they were finding that 1 time out of 10 was actually somebody experiencing a diabetic emergency, which people who have a diabetic emergency can mirror those same types of characteristics. You might get the altered mental status, the slurred speech, all of that stuff. But they are actually having a medical emergency. So them not getting medical attention in enough time, unfortunately, bad things happened. So the Attorney General's office has started looking at that and said, okay, now we need to address this. And we need to start retraining on officers that, okay, when you have all of these indicators, yeah, it's probably this, but you need to ask the question somewhere in your interview, are you a diabetic? Are you having a diabetic emergency? Things like that. At least rule that out. So the same way how we have a practice that we've done for years that we've now had to tweak a little bit because of newfound data and newfound studies, the same thing when you're looking at some of the characteristics of when you run into people with autism, because you might have a failure to maintain eye contact. You might have not answering questions completely, if answering questions at all, may just completely ignore your presence whatsoever. A normal touch on the elbow that would be non-confrontational to anybody else, they may react erratically because they may have tactile issues. They may have cognitive issues, so they may not follow your questions. They may not follow your requests immediately or at all. You know, those are considered to be non-compliant. If I'm speaking to you and you're failing to maintain eye contact with me, you're completely acting like I'm not there. Those we look at as indicators of possible dishonesty. But in the world of autism, those are actually common traits, you know, throughout the world of autism. Anybody who's experienced autism, no, my son, I can speak to my son, and he's not being defiant, but he'll look at me, he'll look past me like I'm not standing there, like I'm not even in the room. You know, sometimes they may not process a different in a tone of voice and an inflection. You know, you're a parent, you know, when you yelled at your son, if you said it regularly the first time and he didn't comply with you didn't comply with your instruction, you put your mom voice on, and then you said it a little bit more stern. But sometimes with children with autism, that doesn't work. You can scream to your blue in the face, and it may not have the desired effect that you're looking for because they don't understand tonality. Excuse me, they may not understand tonality. So there's different things like that when we speak, and we may elevate our inflection when we're speaking to somebody with autism. That may have zero effect. So us as police officers, us as law enforcement officers, we are charged with the caretaking of the community, and people with autism are absolutely members of our community. If anything, they are our most vulnerable segment of our community. So we have to take extra steps to recognize it with what it is. You know, if you don't know, yeah, but you never want to be that guy that at the end of it you took steps thinking that you had something criminal, and then come to find out you just had a child with autism who was not being defiant, who was not being non-compliant or anything like that. He just did not understand what you were asking him to do. No cop wants to be that guy.
So, in the whole Black Lives Matter spectrum, who's to say that one of those persons who've been shot and killed, was not autistic? I don't want to use anyone's name, but in the beginning of this increase in police shootings, several years ago, there was one young man who was non-responsive, and his mother was on television saying that, you know, there was something wrong. The officer totally misunderstood, and a life was lost. And so if we accomplish nothing else other than awareness and interest, hopefully we'll save a life. We'll save a life. Portia, you have an unusual situation.
Yeah, mine is completely unusual, but I want to go back and piggyback off of you three. You stated that when every morning you touch your grandson's picture on your refrigerator, and I guess you pray for him.
I do.
But you need to also pray for his mom and his dad to make sure that they can do the best that they can with him in the situation.
Done.
Just keep their mind together, their body as well as their soul together. In terms of that, in terms of let's say the parking or the signs in the neighborhood that on the street, that's the autism child in neighborhood. They're on the street to have the drivers to slow down. But I also lived in a complex. I used to live in Tiffany Manor years ago, and I also had that same sign placed inside the parking lot. So as long as you can have them on the street, but you can also have them inside any complex that you're living in. Another thing that I do is I have the medical bracelets.
Okay. Please talk about that.
Okay.
Because I think you mentioned it, or somebody mentioned it.
So what I
Monday.
do was I have them, but I also have one on my son's shoe, on his shoe. So it's one medical bracelet that says, is with his shoelace, that says autistic child nonverbal and runner. I also have one that goes around his wrist, but I place it on the loop of his belt, so it's easily seen. It's shiny. That says the same thing: nonverbal, autistic child, runner, will not respond. So I have those bracelets for Isaiah. So it's just an alert to let them know that something's going on. He uses assistive technology device to speak because, again, he doesn't speak. In terms of some of the issues with law enforcement, I'm scared for my sons when they get older. You might have kids that are flapping and jumping around, and the officer might say he hit me or he assaulted me. I don't want my child to be labeled like that. I have one that's diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder, and he might violate your personal space. He might come to you and say, but why, but why, but why? And he wants to know why. Why are you holding me? Why are you asking me these questions? Why are you here? And he'll keep asking you why? And it's going to keep coming out like that because he also has echolalia, which is that repetitive speech. So, you know, you're cautious about those things. One of my sons, he has to use the bathroom at every transition. So what if he's in the street and he's getting older and he decides to use the bathroom in public? And again, what is that in terms of legal terms? So I question those things, the eye contacts, everything. But again, I have two on the spectrum, not one.
That's right.
And it's doubly, it's like an overload. So we have those things that's going on. What I live by daily is faith first. So faith, patience, work, keep the balance, momentum and balance. So faith, patience, work, momentum and balancing my whole life out. So I try to be a mom. I try to be the teacher. I try to be a friend. I just try to educate myself so that I can be better off, raising my children as a single mom, and just doing what I need to do for their safe and well-being.
So, you've heard 4 stories from 4 different people who live 4 different lifestyles. So it highlights the point that there is no perfect spectrum, if we can use that phrase, for a child who is living with autism. I do want to just touch on this, and I've said this to people in my office who are grandparents, and I'm reluctant to make it a full-blown discussion, but I have warned them, as Nadine has educated me more, to the fact that do not allow your pediatrician to give you measles, mumps, and rubella in one shot. It's called the bomb. What is it called?
The cocktail.
The cocktail. It's called the cocktail. So for those of you who are considering, when I told my staff, each one called their daughter and said, listen, if so-and-so hasn't had their shot, don't do it. It hasn't been proven, but it is on the table for discussion. Our children's brains have not developed enough at the age of 2 to absorb what this cocktail, I call it a bomb, is doing to our children.
Can
So,
I say,
yes.
I wanted to say this because I got some disturbing news today that affects all of us who have children, that New Jersey is currently in the process of advancing a law that's mandating, no matter what your religion is, that the vaccinations have to be given. I will tell you, for me personally, I do believe that the vaccinations in one time, multiple shots at one time, contributed to my son's diagnosis. I 100% know that if he had gotten those shots spaced out like I did 40, 50 years ago, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. So I say it to all parents. I'm not saying don't vaccinate your children. I'm saying vaccinate them one shot at a time. Have it spaced out. Because as Council President Crump said, it's an overload on the brain. And these are tiny brains who are still developing. So I say get yourself educated. You know, your pediatrician is going to say, no problem, get it done. But ask your pediatrician at what age did they give their child those shots, and see what the response will be. So just get educated on it. And, you know, every child is not the same, because some people say, well, my child got the MMR and nothing happened to them. There's not a one-size-fits-all. But look at the numbers. The numbers speak for themselves. 1 in 10,000 a decade ago. 1 in 45 nationally, 1 in 41 in New Jersey. Those speak. Why is that happening? And it's important that we educate ourselves about everything that's in those shots. Mercury, which, you know, contributes to autism. Lead in the paint contributes possibly to autism as well. My son would put everything in his mouth. These children don't know. And here's what I'll say is, it is an epidemic. The government needs to get more involved. The communities from the state, the federal, and the local level, they have to get involved and help these families. We need resources and we need help. And a zip code shouldn't be the reason we don't get it.
Would you say that again? The zip code.
The zip code should not be a reason that our children and families don't get the help and the resources that they need. You know, I started Nason's Place because of the lack of resources in my own community. And I think a lot of it had to do with the education about autism in our community. That's why it's important for me as a mother and as a president of Nason's Place is to ensure that I educate as many people as we possibly can, because with education comes acceptance. With acceptance will come help.
Portia, have the last word, if you will.
I just wanted to piggyback on the issue with mercury. And we had the mercury within the vaccinations, but we also had the mercury within our old fillings, within our teeth. And there was I guess there was a study done which is called the smoking tooth. And it said that the mercury within the fillings was actually pouring down every time we talk or move our mouth, that the mercury would go into our bloodstream and then pass on to our unborn babies and things like that. So mercury, the vaccinations, I graduated from a high school within Newark, and we had about 74 students within my class. Out of that 74, it's about 15 of us that have children on the autism spectrum. So again, we don't know what's going on and where this autism is coming from, but it can be in anything from the vaccinations, from the fillings, the things we eat. A lot of people have fertility issues, and once they start breeding and having kids, then we have kids that are also on the spectrum as well. But I think that it's best that we actually educate ourselves, help people that are on the spectrum, do what you can for them. You see someone's having an issue or a problem, don't just say that's a bad kid, just say maybe that's the parent that needs some assistance, and help that person. I know you have to stop, so we can just continue to help.
Well, this is not a stop.
Okay.
This is just a comma. I want to thank our panel so much for being real and honest about an issue that affects so many of us. I'm going to ask Brenda Jones if she will run a trailer with my telephone number, so that if you are one of those persons hidden in the shadows, wants to know more, you can call my office. There is going to be a PSA, and I'm asking all of you to look out for it. We are going to have a special walk, awareness walk for autism, Saturday, April 28th. 9 o'clock is registration. Our celebrity host is none other than Mayor Raz J. Baraka. We invite all of you to come and be with us. Thank you again so much. God bless you, and good night.